So, health and biotech news a tech bro or cis would find interesting. On today's docket, we have David Sinclair, the OG of longevity, and Adam's secret crush has launched a new company.
We're talking about using... I disagree with that. He's not the OG of longevity and he's not my crush.
I was wondering which part you disagree with. There'll be a lot of hearts breaking around the world as we speak.
So, also using generative AI models similar to ChatGPT to design antibody drugs. We're talking about transhumanist gene editing to enable people to sleep less and function even better. I'll do quick intros for everyone because if I let these guys talk about themselves, we'll be here forever. So Adam is a longevity doctor, co-founder of Span Health, which was acquired by EightSleep, a company Elon Musk recently endorsed on Twitter. And Adam's also a semi-famous Instagram dude, 150,000 followers. Imran is an investor and Oxford-trained medical doctor. He's ex-Mckinsey and co-founder of healthcare data company NYE Health, but now basically a full-time delinquent and digital vagabond. And I'm Musti. I am a doctor and create big picture medicine, and that's where my CV ends. So, Adam, do you want to start with the David Sinclair story?
Yeah, David Sinclair has launched a new business. He's so good at creating demand for his new businesses. Anyway, so I'm not sure what his involvement is, but he seems to be pretty involved in this. It's called Tally Health. This is from their website. So at Tally Health, we're changing the way we age. So inspired by the opportunities unlocked by breakthroughs in longevity and aging, we set out to create a company whose mission would be to help people live their fullest lives. And the way they do it is basically, it's a subscription model where you have regular blood tests. The test gives you your biological age. Now, this seems to be a new biological age clock that they've created called New Age. I haven't seen much evidence behind it, so not sure what goes into it. And they give you a supplement that supposedly, and this is also from their website, addresses the 12 hallmarks of aging. So this supplement contains a few different molecules. It contains spermidine, fisetin, quercetin, resveratrol, and calcium alpha ketoglutarate. These are all compounds that you can buy separately. They're all supplements that have kind of flimsy some evidence that they might be helpful for health. So yeah, that's the new business. What do you guys think?
So this is a supplement combined with longevity coaching. The supplements have some evidence, it seems like in animal studies, that they may work. And he's doing some blood tests that, because there's a difference, right? There's chronological age, which is like your actual age that would be on your passport. And then there's your kind of these new aging measures some people and some startups have made. And he's aiming to improve this new kind of novel age he's created using this supplement. Is that about right?
Yeah, so it's a biological age test, and they will presumably want to improve that biological age on the program. So the program includes, as you said, coaching, but it also includes a supplement. So I've had actually a lot of experience in building businesses similar to this. At Span, we used to do the coaching element. So we would focus on what we'd call longevity coaching, which is nutrition, sleep, and exercise coaching. The feedback that we would use wasn't a blood test. It was just wearable data that we get from your wearable. But we were introducing a blood test, and it was going to be something similar to this. Now, the problem with that is, in theory, it sounds good, but in practice, when you actually use this method with patients or users, there's actually not that much information that comes from one number that gives you your biological age, because people don't trust it as an accurate representation of how they feel or their health. So after you do it once or twice, you lose faith in what you're doing. And I think that's a problem that they're going to be facing. By the way, a problem that other companies are facing, like glycan age. Right. That's why they're introducing more specific glycan age. So they're doing like a one related to your heart, your immunity. They're trying to provide more and more kind of data points, so the person feels like they're actually improving their health rather than just improving some amorphous number called biological age.
Yeah, and I think, I was sort of thinking, like, how would you actually prove that this product, this service is actually working? So I think this is one of those businesses
I don't think they care about that. So
yeah, exactly.
Everything with David Sinclair's products are targeted towards like a general audience that doesn't really understand the science. That's my, I guess, hot take, is that he actually doesn't care about people who are into real anti-aging stuff. He's good at courting the general audience that is kind of interested in health and wellness at large, but people who understand that biological age clocks don't mean anything, improving a biological age clock, it has not been shown to improve any health outcomes that we care about. People who understand that are not actually the target audience, I think.
So that's like a very specific complaint, which is like, people who understand the aging science probably wouldn't be as customers. I think there's like another way to look at it, which is, in my view, like these supplements and these tablets should be like one in a very long list of things you should do to boost your health and well-being and increase your longevity. So for example, yesterday I met the first person in my life, after having read about them on Twitter, who's taking rapamycin. And I met him on the day that he took his first dose of rapamycin. So for those of you who haven't heard of rapamycin, it's a drug, I think, which is in use in like traditional, if I call it traditional medicine, in kidney transplant patients, right? It has like an immunosuppressant effect with a different dosing regimen. But people are now basically looking at rapamycin as the kind of panacea for, reducing your biological aging or increasing longevity. And so I was chatting to him and I was like, okay, so you're taking rapamycin, like, do you go to the gym? It's like, nah, I find it hard to go to the gym. Okay, do you eat well? We're like eating baklava. And starting the question, he's like, not really, don't really eat well. Like, I work night shifts, etc., etc. And this is something
I actually disagree with that take. I understand your take. You're like, there's so many other things that you can do to improve your health, rather than taking something that is experimental or supplements or whatever. I actually disagree with that because I obviously agree with the premise. There are other things that are more proven and things that you can do. But if there's any benefit to supplements, it doesn't mean that you can't take them unless you've optimized everything else in your health.
Sure.
If there's any benefit, there should be benefit even if you don't do the basics. So I don't see the dichotomy. I think it's a false dichotomy.
But do we know that rapamycin used like this in 20-something-year-olds is safe and doesn't have any long-term consequences? And I mean, he was talking about
I'll give you my rapamycin spiel. I have a whole spiel about it, but yeah.
Because as he was explaining, he was like, it might reduce my sperm count. And I was like, is it definitely going to come back? There's an awkward silence.
Yeah, we don't know that.
Yeah, so that's my point, right? Like, okay, there might be some incremental benefit, but like, what's the cost? It's an unknown entity.
No, we don't even know if there's any incremental benefit. The thing is, there are trials going on, so we'll actually know more towards the end of the year or early next year, specifically the Pearl trial, which is interesting, that is looking at hard markers of health like visceral fat, I think is their primary outcome. Yeah, but basically, like the thing with rapamycin is, sure, it's experimental, but it's probably like the most promising in animal studies. So that's why people are making that jump into humans. Right. The way I think about it is, if it is done, it should be done very under very controlled circumstances where we measure safety markers and effect markers regularly.
I would add one thing to that statement, which is in your dog. Like, under controlled conditions. What it is like, you're monitoring the safety in your dog.
Okay, but maybe I didn't explain myself. So it seems like people are doing it anyway, right? So if you look online, there's loads of ways to get it off on the from India, and people are taking it online like by themselves anyway. So if I don't know, like, this is an interesting question that I'd like your perspective on. If a patient comes to you and says, I'm taking rapamycin anyway, I want someone to monitor this and help me take it safely. What's the right response here? Is it, I officially say that you advise you not to take rapamycin, however, your well-being is my priority, so this is the way to take it safely in my estimation? Or is it, I don't want anything to do with this, I don't want to lose my license?
So my feel that would be, and this is, I'm someone, like, I haven't practiced for years, so my outside take would be like, if I had a lot of comfort in prescribing and using rapamycin in patients on a regular basis because of my day job, if I could put it that way, let's say, for example, it's in renal transplant, I'm comfortable with the pharmacokinetics, I'm comfortable with the safety profile, the dosing, the regimens, etc., then I think I would be like a bit more inclined. But if I wasn't a physician that was comfortable using it regularly, then I would caution against, like, a bit of dabbling in rapamycin prescription and monitoring on the side.
That's a really good point, actually. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, Adam, I think your take on rapamycin is possibly the worst take I've heard in terms of the cost benefit of doing stuff that's proven to work and will have a huge benefit versus doing something that's experimental and could have unknown downsides. But it's quite interesting as well to just think that people are basically getting health advice from Twitter and other sources like that, and actually doing quite what I would consider quite extreme stuff. And I wonder, like, what the rapamycin now, metformin, we discussed that. I wonder what, like, kind of in the next 10 years, what else is going to pop up? Because there's kind of controls with, like, especially in the UK with like advertising pharmaceuticals and things on TV. But Twitter's a kind of free-for-all Wild West environment where people are getting a lot of interesting takes on different drugs.
Yeah,
and,
let
like,
me just
actually
be clear.
them.
Like, I don't think anyone should be prescribed rapamycin. I don't think anyone should take rapamycin. Like, consult your doctor, obviously. But I'm just thinking, what if there is a benefit to rapamycin? How do we do it the most effectively? I think there should be trials, basically, and that's what's going on. There's a few trials going on. So if you're interested in rapamycin, just wait. I would say just wait a year and wait for the results
data.
of the human trials. Yeah.
All right.
Awesome. So anything else on that, or Imran, do you want to talk about your ChatGPT for antibody drugs?
Yes, yeah, happy to do that. So there was an interesting paper that sheds a different light on large language models. Like, many of us have come across them, as writers of crappy social media posts and whatnot. But earlier this year, in bioRxiv, which is a kind of online, scientific journal, it's not peer-reviewed, so you can sort of self-publish papers on bioRxiv. Around the timing of the JP Morgan conference, which is like one of the biggest bio conferences in the calendar every year, it's around December, January time. There was a company in the US called Absci, which used one of these generative AI models to actually design an antibody. So the paper itself is pretty dense. Musti, I'm sure we can link it below. But let me just explain sort of like what's actually going on here. So an antibody is a protein that we all have, like, in our bodies normally in health. They're tiny little proteins that bind to things that invade your body, things that cause infections, like bacteria and so on, and are part of your immune system. And as drugs, they're actually a really big deal. So if you look at the highest grossing drugs, including the highest grossing drug of all time, and just the highest sellers, you can see like many of them are antibody drugs. The last couple of years were a bit different because we have the COVID vaccines, which everybody was taking. Antibodies are actually, they're also implicated in like autoimmune diseases. So when antibodies bind to something they shouldn't bind to, that can be a situation where you can actually develop an autoimmune disease. So they're pretty important. Now, making antibody drugs is a kind of like messy process, and it involves lots of like animal systems. Sometimes it's mice, it's cancer cell lines, it's bacteria, etc. And you're basically generating these like huge random variations of antibodies. They're kind of like imagine like a random number generator, but doing the same thing for proteins. And you're then basically selecting this very tiny minority of those proteins, those antibodies, which are binding some target of interest. Let's say that you know that there's a disease pathway, and if you can bind to a molecule in the disease pathway, you can actually interrupt the development of that disease, or you can reverse it. So scientists are basically using these systems to generate all these random antibodies and then testing them and screening them against these targets. So in the paper, the team actually used an AI generative algorithm to basically create the protein sequences that would become, folded as antibodies and bind a specific protein, which is really well understood in medicine. It's called HER2. It's a protein that's found in breast cancer, in some breast cancer patients. And if I could create an analogy, the same way that like an LLM, a large language model like ChatGPT, can spit out letters that become words and sentences that have meaning, in this case, the algorithm is basically spitting out like amino acids that create proteins, and the proteins then fold into antibody structures that have like biological meaning. They actually bind something. And what's interesting about this paper is that they predicted, using this algorithm, a bunch of structures, and then they actually created those antibodies in a lab, and they tested them against the target, and they found that some of them actually bind this breast cancer protein more strongly than drugs that are in the market today.
So basically what we're saying is usually this process happens by testing loads of molecules in mice, and then
Exactly.
It probably takes billions of dollars in funding. They have to go through multiple rounds of testing. You've done all of this in kind of a simulated environment. So this process probably accelerates drug discovery, and it also accelerates or like it saves a lot of money.
Exactly. Yeah. So like if you look at how much it costs at the moment to bring a drug to market, it's about $2.5 billion to bring one drug to market. That's one of the reasons why drug prices are expensive, and there's basically a lot of financial risk in drug development. So what they have done is, it's actually only, if you imagine like antibody development is like a 5 or 6 stage process. You need to find a target, then you need to generate a bunch of different antibodies, then you need to screen out the ones that work, test them in the laboratory, make sure they're safe in like animal models, move them into humans, run the trials, and then approve them. So this is actually only accelerating that early stage of the process after you found a target. It's like the generation of the variants of antibodies that you could pick from, and then selecting the ones that bind well to a target. So if you think about the whole process, it usually takes like 5 to 10 years. It's one segment of that process, which is being accelerated. It's still very significant, but a lot of the cost of the successful candidates to go into clinical trials, the cost will also sit in the actual clinical trials where you have to put them into initially small numbers of people and then potentially thousands and thousands of patients.
Wait, let me give the like really dumbed down explanation of my understanding of antibodies, just in terms of why this is an important thing. So essentially, we are hijacking our body's normal immune system. And the reason we're doing that is because antibodies are like search and destroy soldiers. They're really specific. And if we work out that, okay, there's this type of cancer, it has this protein on it, we can make an antibody, which is like a soldier, that finds it, attaches to it, and then we can deliver a drug specifically to that area. In certain cases, for example, that could be a breast cancer tumor, and then we can deliver a kind of really strong, potent drug that goes in, kills that cancer or controls it, and that's amazing. So like that's basically right why antibodies are so important. Is there any other reason why we should like kind of care about this?
My kind of meta take on this is that I don't think this kind of lock and key model will actually accelerate any moving towards like a cure for cancer or like improvement in cancer treatments that is like that significant. Pharma companies like it because it's a straightforward model. It's very well established how to research this model. And if you create the next drug that gives you 5 months more survival than the previous drug, then that's a lucrative way of entering a market. But the problem is that this model hasn't actually generated like big step improvements in cancer care. Right. The reason for that is that cancer is a very complex disease, obviously, and it's rare that a cancer will be controlled by one receptor. Right. And even if it is, what tends to happen is you target that one receptor, the cancer improves, and then it learns and evolves, and then something else pops out. That's called cancer resistance to treatment. So, I mean, my kind of just meta take is that this is really interesting. It'll probably lead to more and more effective drugs, but it won't lead to a step change, even if we have like 100% accuracy in predicting
binding.
Kind of binding,
yeah. That's fair. It's basically like I mean I really like the way you explain that, and I think the whole like cancer evolution and resistance to treatment phenomenon is a really difficult. A surgical strike is not going to like kill something which is constantly moving. But I think that the ability to basically design, many people will have heard of like AlphaFold and the DeepMind algorithm that can predict protein folding and so on. So this is a really practical example of like taking us one step closer to being able to actually create like tools in the armory, which we can basically on demand and in a kind of customized way or personalized way potentially create using silicon, using chips. So it won't be, as you say, like a silver bullet for a particular tumor, but it does give us this potential to personalize and customize these antibodies rather than having to basically rely on the randomness of nature to spit out like the protein sequence that may be a good binder. I think one of the other interesting things that they mentioned is that they can actually design out some of the known protein shapes and structures which cause side effects. So that's like another interesting aspect of this. It could also have implications for development timelines.
Just quickly, is in terms of just I don't really understand biotech or the market in general. I know you've said that obviously it's just like a step in the whole 5 or 10 year chain.
Yeah.
But like financially speaking, is this something that's interesting? Is because you said over the past, what, 5-10 years, excluding vaccines, some of these antibody drugs have been some of the biggest players in the market.
Yeah, biggest players in the market doesn't mean that they've actually shown like step change improvements in treatment outcomes. No, I mean they have shown improvement, but the way cancer treatment happens, the most lucrative drugs have a test coupled to a drug. So, for example, if someone has breast cancer, we do a biopsy and then we test it for different targets. And if they're positive for a certain target, then that will make them eligible for a certain drug. And this will be based on a clinical trial to show that this drug improves outcomes in people who have this specific target. Usually these are not like step changes, they're like small changes. But this is the model that has driven the cancer treatment for the last, I would say, 10 years at least. So what this will do is this might accelerate the discovery of new treatments and new targets in cancer. But just like looking at this whole model for the last decade or so, it hasn't led to a step change improvement, like a radical improvement in cancer treatment. But maybe we will never get there. Like maybe it's just too complex to.
Yeah, like the CAR T-cell therapies, for example, which are showing like untreatable tumors basically being brought under control. I think we just passed the 10-year anniversary of like 2 of the patients with blood cancer that were basically 2 of the first patients treated with these personalized cell-based therapies. So basically taking a cell out of somebody's immune system, like massaging it and adapting it to fight their tumor, and then putting it back into their body. And then that cell, becomes effective at controlling the tumor in a patient that otherwise had uncontrolled, untreatable cancer. That would be an example, I think, of like a step change type therapy. But I agree with you. This is incremental, but it's exciting, and it is a threshold which has been breached in terms of like AI's role in drug development, and actually validating that in a wet lab to show that you can actually design things that will bind to targets. But yeah, it will take time. I think there's
super cool, really interesting.
I think there's like probably like a few dozen AI designed drugs in various stages of clinical trials. So we don't actually have one on the market today where it's like well known that artificial intelligence played a key role in the design and the development of that drug. But I'm pretty sure if you look forward like maybe 3 to 5 years, and certainly a decade, we'll have other examples on the market, and then we'll be able to say, was that technological advance of using artificial intelligence, what was the actual impact of that on patients? What was the impact on the cost of development, the speed of development?
Yeah, and Imran, I want to get your thoughts on Adam kind of made the point where there's a separation between what's cool, what makes Nature papers, what makes headlines, what makes monetary sense, and then actual kind of what's actually working. And there's this concept, I think it was from a paper written by Jack Scanlon. It's called Eram's Law. So Moore's Law is the thing in technology where I think every 2 years, basically computers get about twice as fast, and it's kind of an exponential curve. That's my understanding of it. Eram's Law is Moore's Law backwards. So even though in technology in general, we're noticing this like exponential increase in technology, in pharmaceuticals, we have Eram's Law, which is the exact opposite, where we're getting more AI, more technology, probably more money as well, but we're not making the same advancement. In fact, I think drug costs are rising, or it costs more money to develop the same drugs from my understanding of kind of Eram's Law. Can you add some kind of context as to why drug prices are rising and why we're seeing this kind of slowing down in pharmaceutical development, even though we have more AI and more money?
Yeah, so this is a kind of complex story, but you're right in saying that prices are going up. So there's a few factors at play here. One is that development timelines are stubbornly long. I think in COVID, we saw a like temporary acceleration around the vaccines and so on that got a lot of people very, very excited that this would be like a sustained change and we could spread it across the board into other drug categories. But the data that's emerged, I think, since COVID has shown like a rebound. Some of that is not surprising, but I think that we haven't seen the kind of like step change in the field that we were hoping for. The second thing is that every drug that's being released, generally, like on average, their peak sales are actually trending downward. So you can see that, there are some forecasts that say that actually drugs that are being released in the future will actually earn less per asset. And you also have the problem that Adam mentioned about this incremental increase in patient benefit. So I saw another statistic recently from an academic group. It's published in a science journal that said less than 20% of all drugs that were released in like the last few years actually had like a dramatic or significant clinical incremental benefit for patients. They were like a real step change forward. That's less than 1 in 5. I think it was like 16% the number. So you have the situation where there's a lot of like pressure on the cost of development, the innovation that is demanding the increase in price is sometimes not really there. And you also have different modalities of drugs, different types of drugs like cell and gene-based therapies, which are inherently just much, much more expensive to produce. And they're targeting much, much smaller patient populations. So again, you have these like much higher prices. I think the highest priced drug on the market at the moment is like $3.5 million per treatment. You can run a health economic analysis in certain countries on these treatments for things like sickle cell anemia, other, lifelong conditions to show that actually sometimes the cost actually does pay off. But it's extremely, extremely high cost.
Is this just the natural end game of having more and more personalized treatments for more and more conditions that eventually things are just going to become much more expensive? And it sounds like the only solution to this is technology, to be honest. Is that like a good take?
Yeah, because I think that's true. Because if you look at the first wave of drug development, which is like small molecule and chemical drugs, some people would say, who've been in the industry for a long time, would say that a lot of the low-hanging fruit in terms of like druggable targets or small molecule drugs that could have been developed, a lot of those have actually been discovered for like, and you look at the progress that we've made in cardiovascular disease and in many other conditions, right? So the next horizon of medications are actually like, in their nature, they're very different. They're not like chemical drugs that can be produced cheaply for pennies at scale and packaged into pills and shipped around the world in, a regular supply chain. They're cells taken from your own body. They're RNA therapies. They're, other kinds of gene therapies built on viruses and so on. So these are just inherently much more sensitive. They're much more expensive. They're sometimes NF1 treatments. So we're entering that paradigm. People are still innovating on the frontier to reduce the cost. So some people are looking at it from like a manufacturing point of view. How can we take like some of the manufacturing facilities required to create cell-based therapies and put them like in a small box that can fit in a lab, as an example, so we can bring it local to the patient and we can reduce the cost. Other people are looking at producing, like CAR T cells I mentioned before, which are these cells that you take out the body, you change and then reintroduce into the body. There's now some research to show in animal models. I'm not sure what David Sinclair would think about this. Maybe he'd create a company around it for humans. Bad joke. But there's evidence in animal models that you can just inject RNA and they'll target T cells inside the animal and create a CAR T cell inside the body, right? So it's just an injection. It's not like taking the cells out, changing the cells, going through all of that process of cleaning and purifying and scaling the colonies, putting them back in. It's literally just injection. So there will be innovation that will retain a lot of the benefits for patients, therapeutic benefit, and dramatically reduce the cost just by basically harnessing the power of biology itself. If you look at like all the things that our bodies are capable of, we just eat like fruit and vegetables and things like that. And then inside our bodies, we're like producing antibodies, we're producing like T cells, we're producing all of these amazing things. Sometimes it goes wrong, of course. But the more we can sort of use biology as the kind of platform to build the solution, I think it potentially could also be a way to reduce these costs.
So interesting. Okay, let me talk about my story, which is everyone thinks this is a terrible idea. Everyone I've discussed this with in the real world, but I sense you guys might like it. So it's transhumanist gene editing to sleep less. So I came across this on Twitter from a guy called Nabil Qureshi, who's a super interesting guy, works at Palantir in health. And it's also been kind of touted on the Effective Altruism forum. But essentially, look, we've all thought as kind of type A people, what if I could sleep less and function perfectly? What if I could sleep 4 to 6 hours a night and still retain my function and have no long-term health consequences? Wouldn't that be amazing? And it turns out there are people like this in the world. They're called familial short sleepers. And apparently Margaret Thatcher was one of these. So there are people in the world who we've studied, and it seems to be an autosomal dominant trait where you can essentially get by on 4 to 6 hours of sleep. You're extra motivated, you don't feel tired after that, and you don't have any long-term kind of harmful effects of that. So these people have been studied, and look, the science on this is not super hot, but it's okay. And they found a series of, I think it's 5 genes, that it seems like if you have a certain variation of these, that you are one of these natural short sleepers. So the next question is, and I sense, Imran, you'll know a lot more about this, but with the new kind of rise of gene editing techniques like CRISPR and lots of others, can we take people and either give them some kind of therapeutic whilst they're adults, or maybe even do this to babies, where we turn on or off these genes and turn these people into natural short sleepers? I mean, the benefits of this are incredible. You could unlock 2 or 3 hours in everyone's day. The productivity gains would be insane. I actually think you'd usher in the next, the fifth industrial revolution. And yeah, it would be awesome. I think it would probably be one of the most valuable drugs ever created, of course, after rapamycin. But what do you guys think of this?
Yeah, so first thing is like I love this idea of finding people who are like X-Men, who have genetic variations that make them superhuman. So my like interest would be mostly people who live longer and who have low incidence of cardiovascular disease, for example. That would be more interesting to me. But yeah, definitely worth like exploring and seeing if we can replicate that phenotype in people, or replicate that genotype phenotypically in the general population. That would be great.
So my personal view on this is I would say I'm a little cautious. I have as I've gotten older, I sort of felt more that the more we cut against the grain of like nature, and whether it's like eating foods that are not, they're not natural, they're highly processed, or it's basically adapting people's behavior. So recently, Noah Smith, who's a great Substack writer, No Opinion, if anyone has subscribed to that newsletter, he published an article where he looked at the change in people's mood, young people in particular, young girls, and suicide rates over the last sort of 20 years. And he sort of hypothesized that the arrival of smartphones into people's hands were like, it just uncannily like coincided with this like inflection point in change in people's mental health and well-being and so on. That's a very specific example, but the kind of broader principle for me is like, I think human beings have taken a very, very long time to adapt to anything, to adapt to biological threats in the environment, to adapt to changes in climate, migration patterns and so on. And now we have this pace of change, which is like exponentially faster. So you're talking about a creature which has evolved for millions of years to sleep in a certain pattern, and then literally overnight you sort of flick a switch that changes that by 20-30%. It will have some unintended consequences. I don't know what those are.
Yeah.
Maybe that we can study those.
I'm totally against this Luddite way of thinking. So yeah, obviously there are loads of cautions. Obviously we don't know if this gene has any other effects. Maybe you could be introducing harms that you don't know of. So yeah, obviously you need to think about it like that. But so PCSK9 inhibitors are a good example of a drug that has been discovered based on this kind of way of thinking. So people who have certain genetic variants have a lower incidence of heart disease. We've studied these people, and we've created molecules that mimic the effect of their genetic variants in other human beings, and the result was PCSK9 inhibitors that are very effective in lowering heart disease risk in certain people. So that would be a way of doing it. But
there you're saving. You're saving people from heart disease. I guess my point is like, what are you like creating somatic cell line permanent gene mutations for? Like, what's at stake here?
No, it should. It's virtually impossible to create genetic alterations like that in a fully formed human being. So I wouldn't think it would be like that. It would be more something like a pill or an injection that creates proteins that would otherwise be created naturally in someone who has a genetic variation.
Guys, I think there are integrating and non-integrating gene therapies, right? So the integrating ones are that would affect your kind of germline and you'd pass it on to your kids. And then from what I've read, there's like non-integrating gene therapies, which I think is used in cystic fibrosis, or at least is being researched into that, where you have this effect on the genes, but then it's temporary. It would only last weeks or months, and then you'd need to kind of have another round of the treatment. So I think in this whole kind of law of unintended consequences and playing God type line, I think there are ways of doing this which would be less kind of creepy for Imran.
Less permanent.
Yeah, I mean, why not? Let's research it. If some people would want to, experiment on themselves, if you go into it knowing, understanding the risk, Why not? We've done crazier things in the past. We've gone to the moon.
I think the interesting bit of this is as well that we've seen gene therapies that help us with devastating diseases and had some amazing kind of treatments for that. That's cool. That's a bigger deal. But then there's this whole new line of gene therapy for human optimization,
Right.
which is taking people who are fundamentally well, who are fundamentally healthy, and enhancing them. There's this Professor George Church, who is a professor at both Harvard and MIT. Pretty cool credentials. But he has a list of potential genes we could target going forward on his website. I'll link it. But essentially, there are genes that we've seen that are associated with lower pain sensitivity, HIV resistance, lower cancer, longevity, higher cognition, even lower body odor. So Adam, you might want to look into that one. There's really cool kind of optimization that we can do in the future, which I think is something that's kind of unheard of or not talked a lot about because people find it weird. People don't like the idea, but I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, no one's fundamentally healthy forever. Age is something that happens to everyone, and age is obviously not healthy and leads to age-related disease. We only start thinking about aging when it manifests as an actual dysfunction or that we call disease. But aging happens before we call it diseases, and we should be dealing with it before it manifests as an organ dysfunction that we call disease.
I just want to. I feel like I should clarify my position here to crawl out of the Luddite cave. So, I. By the way, first of all, I think that these technologies will be widely accepted and ushered in by society, and there will be a frontier of people that will always pay for them because I see them as kind of on a spectrum of different kind of like self-improvement, whether it's aesthetic or in this case it's like physiological. It sits on that spectrum, and I think society there'll be like enough of a minority that are like up for it in the early days, and they'll try this kind of stuff, and there'll be someone who's looking to make money out of it and create a business around it. So I think it's going to happen. I guess my personal view is like when it comes to like being on the frontier of doing something like this, especially when it's like a small optimization, I would just want to see that there's like safety data, that people have like done it as some kind of scale.
You want other people to figure it out first before you try it.
Exactly. Like call me when you've got the like Cochrane review.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, you want to go to the moon, but you don't want to. What is it?
Be in the
die
first
on
spaceship.
impact. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I thought we'd end with some feedback. I actually got some kind of emailed feedback about, I like what you're doing with this, but you should have more banter. And then
I guess we should explain what we're trying to do here. We're trying to do like a kind of panel show that is focused on health.
Yeah,
that makes it sound boring. Let's say like All In or My First Million for health.
Exactly,
For
health and
pros.
biotech. Yeah, and actually interesting news that
And CISs.
Yeah, and CISs. And I think the Venn diagram, there's some kind of intersection of kind of health and biotech, but also monetary kind of interest in big financial moves, cool frontier research. I just don't think it really exists at the moment. I think there's a few like Substacks and stuff on this kind of stuff, but not a kind of panel show. So yeah, I don't know where it's going to go. Let me. I thought we could read out some of the comments and feedback we've had. Overall,
I haven't heard these, so I'm interested.
Brace yourself.
Yeah. Overall, mine was kind of 100% negative, and no, I got one nice comment. Adam, you've got a few kind of fans in the audience. So someone, I don't think I'll put names in actually because I don't want to kind of at them. But a lady said, 2 randos judging an actual medical researcher. This was about our David Sinclair comments.
Fair enough.
It's fair.
Then someone else said, who are these guys? ? No science background, obviously.
So, I mean, I usually look at things from a clinical, I comment from a clinical point of view. Like, I'm not a researcher, so that's fair enough. But I don't know, Imran, do you have any research background? We probably need someone with like a PhD on the pod.
Yeah, exactly. No, not for a while. So I think that I think that you can still bring a common sense perspective that informs where the rubber hits the road as a clinician or as somebody who can see a kind of more holistic picture of the implications of some of these things that are happening right at the frontier. which is really important. But yeah, I agree with you. It'd be good to have somebody with a PhD.
I mean, I have a master's in genomics. I have a master's in oncology. So I'm not like totally. I'm not
and you have like
from the hip.
40,000 Twitter followers as well, which is
Exactly.
something.
That counts for something.
Yeah.
Let me read 2 more comments. So one said, big picture of medicine, Mustafa Sultan. You are deeply outraged in this subject. Throw away your outdated, in quotes, knowledge and start learning what is going on, or find another job. And then we'll end on a high. Someone said, I love Dr. Adam. So that was... One more. Someone said, lol, exclamation mark, talking about jealousy. That explains why you have 250 views, lol. So yeah, overall negative.
Spicy.
That was...
we're getting there.
Do we have any? Do we respond? Are we going to change anything based on this? Do you think?
Well, I mean, I think we need like more banter. I agree with that.
Yeah.
We probably need like it would. I think it would be cool to get someone who is like a basic science researcher or like a PhD who does this kind of research to give that perspective. Because actually, this is something interesting because like people like David Sinclair, I often see this where when they talk about give like a kind of general health advice, their mindset comes from like dealing with mice and like labs, and it doesn't translate well to people, and they're quite bad at it, to be honest. The only one who does an okay job is Andrew Huberman, and he's had like some experience dealing with humans.
Yeah,
in his research.
Imran, do you have any thoughts on, because you're a super kind of thoughtful guy, and I respect your opinion, but do you have any thoughts on like where we can go with this, or like any, I don't know, because at the moment we're trying to do like all in podcast maybe for health and tech bio, but like are there any interesting avenues, anything we should change? What do you like, what are your thoughts?
I think it will get better with time. I don't think you need to worry about it too much. I think you just keep going. It's like, this is what you've published like 2 of them.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. So like don't think about it too much.
Something like that.
Just do like 15 and see what happens. And the thing about the expertise is that, yeah, you need expertise, but you also need to be able to speak at the level of the audience, right? So what you don't want to do is like turn it into a postgraduate lecture, which is a risk, I think, sometimes. I have that tendency. So not that I'm one to give postgraduate lectures, but you know what I mean? Like it can turn into that kind of conversation, but it needs to be easy for people to understand and to have like clear takeaways. So it's just, I think it will come with practice.
Yeah, we'll get better with time, and maybe our cap is like 250 people watching this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we peaked.
I wouldn't worry too much about the comment about you being outraged with your knowledge. I'm not quite sure what that means, but yeah, if you're not getting any like negative comments, you're probably not close enough to the frontier of interesting stuff.
Nice. I like that.
Thanks, man. Okay, I'll stop recording.